initial implementation of fiber. That's come down in cost. It's still higher cost than copper, but it lasts so much longer. So then the bandwidth, speed and distance, so much faster, and further distances, reliability, and security. So just another little gee whiz kind of thing. Several years ago, in 1956, that was a very good year by the way, the first transatlantic telephone cable, they call it the TAT-1, was spread across the Atlantic, and the first phone lines. In 1988 was the first TAT-8, so the 8th generation. There's the distance, just over 3,000 miles. 2 working pair of optical fibers provided 280 megabits of bandwidth, and that was equivalent to 40,000 telephone circuits. So as you can imagine, just a pair of fibers replacing huge bundles of copper that's been drug along the ocean. And then in 2000, the 14th generation, the TAT-14, and again, that's 4 million times the number of voice circuits carried in that TAT-1. It's just hard to comprehend the increase. There's just a picture of a vessel spreading fiber across the ocean, an artist's depiction of what that would look like, and then a map that's kind of hard to see, but a map showing fiber optics around the world laid in the ocean. Okay, here's another quiz. Anybody have an idea of when Bountiful first used fiber?
Like the city?
Pardon me?
Like the city itself?
The city.
10 years ago.
That's a good guess. 1998, we had fiber installed that goes down here at the bottom of City Hall. It goes up past the fire station, which at that point was Bountiful City Fire Department. Goes over to the power plant, and then there's a spur that goes up to the rec center, which we still provide services to them. Then it comes down to the water and streets, and then down along 1050 South and back up to us. That was installed at a cost of nearly $250,000. And we decided, we had a projection that it was going to be a cost savings paid off in 10 years, just because of the cost that we were paying. Phone circuits, special T1 circuits back then were a couple $1,000 a month. It was quite amazing. So, and then 2 years ago, we added, this is the route that Utopia came in. They came in to install a circuit just for Bountiful City, and they came across 4th North and then followed that same line down into the fire building. That spread over up to 150 North, where we just moved out of, and then there's a little teeny spur right here for the skate park, and then it comes down to into the police department, actually. And right now, the monthly cost for our main gigabit service is $990 a month. And for the other little spurs, like for the skate park, it's $50 a month. And once the original investment is paid, that $990 should drop quite a bit. I'm not sure what it's going to drop down to, but that's a 9-year contract to pay for the original installation. Several years ago, we also looked into the option of providing Wi-Fi. There was something called mesh Wi-Fi and other Wi-Fi solutions. Metrocom was one of the companies that they wanted to come in and install little antennas on streetlights and spread them out just enough in the city to provide a Wi-Fi service. It was very interesting just because the cost of internet was so high back then. So a company came in, Columbia Telecommunications, I don't know if anybody else was around here at that time, but they came in and did a feasibility study, and it was decided that wireless speeds were limited. At that point, it was like 56 megabits per second is the fastest. So there wasn't a high potential for significant speed improvement. And also private providers were increasing their wired speeds. At that point, there was quite a lot of money invested in trying to see how much speeds could be increased over copper. And I'm aware of at least one company that went out of business doing that, and probably others did when they realized that fiber was the way of the future. And also, fiber to the home project started about that time. As we know, last year we had Utopia come in and give the council a presentation on some of their business plans. Just a brief history of Utopia. Several years ago, Bountiful City was invited along with every other city in the state to come and participate in the first Utopia campaign, if you will. Everybody was in a consensus to not participate. I think the climate of the council and the mayor was not to compete with the private sector, so they just said we're not gonna be involved. And so 11 cities joined that nirvana or nightmare. I'm sure everybody's heard a lot of bad things about some of the projects. There was bad press for Provo, Centerville, Brigham City, and others. Provo City actually had a little problem because they were transferring funds to cover for some of the expenses or bonds, or I'm not even sure what the whole thing was, but that hit the news because they were doing things without council approval or but I think Murray and Orem, as far as I know, have good experiences with Utopia. One of the issues was bonds were increasing, partially because as they started implementing Utopia, they had more demand than they expected, and so they needed to bond more. And I'm not a financial person, so I'm just making that up, kind of. One interesting thing that when we first started meeting with Utopia a few years ago, they told us that one of the worst mistakes that they made in the beginning of their project was that they would bring in fiber, for instance, that might come along the freeway and then come in through Fifth South if it was coming into Bountiful. And they'd bypass all the businesses to head to the residents because that's where they promised service. And if they could have stopped and just provided service for the businesses, they could have had some income to start with, especially like Murray City, a huge commercial base. So that's one thing that they've recognized that was one of their biggest mistakes. And then in 2008, their fiber backbone was completed, so their main hub up through I-15 and to different other locations. One other interesting thing is what a fiber provider provides. Say that 10 times. So it's just like getting a phone line with no dial tone. So they'll bring the fiber into Bountiful City. They don't provide internet service. They just provide the fiber, the physical fiber. And each customer is required to purchase their own ISP services. How familiar are you with ISPs? Anybody know what that means?
Internet service provider?
Yeah. So internet service provider. So the model of Utopia and other fiber providers is open access fiber. So they bring fiber in and allow other providers to bring the signal in, if you will. They'll provide an IP address for each location, and then you call X-Mission is a pretty common one in Utah. There's a few others that I'll show you in a minute. But the analogy that I was made familiar with was just the analogy of an airport. So where you have the municipal airport would be the fiber, and then you have all the different carriers that provide the service. And these are from the Utopia presentation from last year. So there's several that you may recognize up here. First Digital, and that reminds me too, we contacted First Digital and Sumo and a couple other providers back when we were going to try to get fiber for the city purposes a couple years ago. First Digital had conduit that already went up to near the 150 North main location. Just using their conduit was going to be about the same cost what Utopia installed the fiber for. A couple other vendors, we just couldn't believe the cost difference. And I think during the council presentation for that approval, gave you a lot of the details regarding that. Just an idea for what the estimated monthly cost for customers or subscribers. A fairly recent estimate is total $65 per month for 250 megabits per second. A lot of CenturyLink customers here maybe get 20 or 40 megabits per second. I'm not sure what the total bandwidth they provide here. I know that CenturyLink and Comcast are working pretty hard to expand their fiber throughout the city. Just a month or so ago, they were Comcast was bringing a new fiber circuit along here to replace their hardwired broadband cable. So based on $30 a month for the fiber plus the ISP rate is where those totals come from. Any questions so far? I called this the perfect storm, Spanish Fork. I'm familiar with John Bocut, who was working down there at the time, and they were trying to get any cable TV provider to come into Spanish Fork. They couldn't get anybody to come. And Wasatch Cable was one of the first cable companies here, and then became TCI, became AT&T. I think it was back when TCI or AT&T took over. At that point, they had a mayor and council that was very progressive and wanted to do their own. So they actually created their own TV distribution network. They've got a Spanish Fork TV station with at least maybe a couple different stations. They'd go out and broadcast baseball games and soccer games. They had college students, interns that were doing the producing, and kind of a amazing thing. But they also, right time, right place, and that's expanded into fiber to the home, cable TV services. So one interesting thing regarding fiber to the home in Bountiful, I was wondering.
Alan, can I
Yes.
ask you could you just explain why the Spanish Fork option is no longer a possibility? Even if you don't know in detail, I guess, just what you know about why that's not an option for
I
Bountiful.
think there are some legal restrictions about doing that. I'm not sure all the details.
Well, I think part of it is that the legislation changed, in part due to Utopia, that the legislature didn't want cities to be in the ISP business, and they were concerned about municipal monopolies, being both the provider of the fiber and the provider of the service. And they've also made some other changes since then. But I just think it's important for the council to know that Spanish Fork, really, it was not only the perfect storm, but at the perfect time for them. And that model's not available for us, but it works well for them.
Yeah, and I don't know of any other city that did anything like it. So regarding fiber to the home in Bountiful, I was curious to find out what the interest was. Miranda might remember, that was one of our first sessions that we were broadcasting after COVID, and we were watching some of the traffic that we had open for comments. I think that might have been a mistake, but we were watching hundreds of comments. I think I sent that log to Gary. But the average YouTube council meeting views as of today is 66 views. That particular session had 592 views. I'll be interested to see how many people are here for this or how many people are watching. And just a little side note about YouTube, with all this new audiovisual stuff, the YouTube streaming finally got completed literally minutes before this meeting. The main audiovisual contractor who was the head of this installation was sick today and left early and left a second in charge to finish it up. So it was kind of down to the wire, but we're also looking into being able to go back to Zoom when the specifications for this building were still first set forth. YouTube was the request, and then because of COVID, we started doing Zoom and realizing the functionality of Zoom. Whereas right now, what people are seeing, the back of my head from the camera, and you here, and they may be able to see some of this, but with Zoom, as an individual presenter can show what's on their computer, the viewers at home will be able to see this.
Alan, there's 25 viewers right now.
25, okay. So 25 live, and then who knows how many are gonna tune in later. And then just based on some of the things that were commented on during that meeting, some of the things that citizens would like to see is dedicated fiber to every subscriber. One thing that happens with Comcast and other providers is they will come in and offer you 100 megabits per second, and they will over-provision the cable going down your street. So that some of you may have seen this. You come home at 6 o'clock, and your speeds are great, and then 10 after 6, they just start sagging. Has anybody seen that? I've seen it within the last couple weeks. So dedicated fiber to every subscriber, that means the bandwidth that's promised to them is what's delivered. And then one request is only subscribers to pay for this service. I think that's a pretty significant concern, is to make sure the citizen that doesn't want it isn't going to pay anything. And then open access, again, that competition between internet service providers, unlimited for future growth. Just some of the possibilities, the benefits for Bountiful Fiber is utility metering. I mean, they already have radio metering that works so much better than it used to, but this could even be a little more high-tech. A smart grid can do rolling power adjustments. Some people can sign up now to have their air conditioning adjusted. So business connectivity, I just put that in there, that maybe with more fiber in Bountiful City, it might draw more businesses here. And then security systems can run through it. More smart city applications that we haven't even explored here in Bountiful. And then just a reminder of some of the business models. This is again based on what Utopia came and told us. They have a plan where they would finance things, but the city would guarantee or back it. The previous estimate was 30% take rate would cover all the financing of the whole project. And then the estimates in Bountiful exceed 40%. Yeah, it's kind of hard for them to say, hey, we expect 50 or more, but
Where does the 40% estimate come from?
that's again Utopia from last
It's
year.
Utopia's number?
From last year,
Okay.
yeah. And they also mentioned that this was pre-actual survey. They're basing it on other cities that they've surveyed, and then the kind of unique bedroom community at Bountiful that's more of a bedroom community than other locations that they've installed. So they think that actually will raise their rate. And then the other option is financed by the city. And then finally, financed by the city but built and managed by the city. They have had some cities that said, we're going to do our own thing. They want Utopia to kind of be involved and help them install it, and then they're going to take on the maintenance and management of the system after that. That sounds pretty complicated, and we're not experienced with that. I don't think this is an exhaustive list, but Entry Point Networks is a company that started in Wyoming. One of their key projects was Ammon, Idaho. Again, it's quite a bit smaller than we are, but there was a Harvard research paper based on that installation, and it was, again, open access. Utopia, we know about. Google Fiber. Some of you may know that Google Fiber came and bought Provo's fiber project. And then Salt Lake City, Mill Creek, CenturyLink. I'm not sure, I'm not that familiar with what their footprint is as far as fiber to the home. And then what's next? I guess it's the council's decision to proceed, have a survey done, analyze those survey results, decide on what business model would best fit Bountiful City, submit a RFP, and go for it. Questions?
Questions from the council?
I think this is really important that we move ahead with this. And to me, it seems like it's a lot of fiber, offers a lot of benefits to our residents. I know me personally, I have a hard time getting just in my own home, I have a difficult time getting the speeds I need. And but I just wonder though, what in your opinion, Alan, is the right way to go? I mean, do you think that there's a service, do you think that there's someone who really looks like the best, option for us? Or, I mean, assuming that we have the take rate and assuming that we have, that the council wants to move forward, do you think there's like a way that looks like the best option moving forward, or what do you think?
I haven't looked into the Entry Point Networks at all. I'm not sure of what the possibility of getting Google Fiber in here is. I haven't explored that at all either. So my answer is just going to be based on what I'm familiar with. And a few years ago, if somebody said Utopia, I would have said absolutely not. But our experience with having them come in and install our added fiber network to the city and the reliability and service that we've experienced so far, I'd lean that way, but I wouldn't do anything without going through the survey and looking into it more.
So to me, it's kind of like a question of the chicken versus the egg, because I know that they can do a survey for us and they could do the work, right? But we want to make sure that we're being wise. I mean, we don't want to jump in. It's one thing like last week, I personally changed internet service providers and I went from one company to another, and now I already wish that I hadn't because the customer service is terrible and the speeds aren't any better. But it's one thing for me to make a decision for my family to just change like that and see the results and have those consequences, but it's another thing for our city to engage on this new journey. I mean, it's something that we have to be methodical, and we have to be careful. We can't just jump in without looking at all the pros and cons and options. But I'm wondering with Utopia, it does seem like they could do a lot of the work for us, like the survey and everything like that, but we would want to make sure that they're actually the best company and that all of the other concerns that we might have would be, so in terms of a survey, do you think that it would be better to first, if we're going to move forward, if the council wants to move forward, do you think it'd be better if we do our independent survey, or if the company that gets the RFP, if they do a survey?
That's another question I don't know how to answer because, yeah, I do see your concern about having Utopia being the ones that are running the survey, but I don't know how much control they can have over results.
I'd be comfortable with us providing our own survey. I don't think that
Yeah.
potential contractors ought to be conducting that for us. Just my opinion.
That makes sense.
I think what you would like to get out of the survey would be a really good point, maybe for discussion for the next few minutes, because that can help guide the rest of our conversations. I think at a minimum, you know, we want to get a sense of take rate.
Yes.
Amen.
I think at a very minimum, but I think there are other issues we could address, and you know, I'd love to hear what Alan thinks maybe we ought to ask, and we'd like to hear what the council would like to ask.
Yeah, I think a survey would be great, and obviously take rate, are you interested in paying X amount for these kind of speeds, or would you sign up if this were an option, you know? But, yeah,
I think a lot of it too could be education. I remember that when I came and asked council's approval to bring Utopia in for Bountiful's private service, there were a couple people that got up and made comments. One person was very much opposed to having Bountiful become a Utopia city because of the bad press that some of those had had, and also the connotation that everybody's going to be paying for it. And then there were other comments from citizens who said, I can't wait to get fiber, whether it was Utopia or not. But so some people were saying stop, and some people will go, you can't go fast enough. But regarding the survey, I agree with Richard. It's maybe we can use some of the survey. We do have survey data, some sample surveys already that we could use.
I would love to move forward with a survey.
We have talked in the past too, council, about having some presentations from those that may be possibilities for Bountiful, and I don't know that we've seen enough of that from those providers to show us what they have and what they can do for us.
Yeah, again, as I mentioned earlier, some of my answer was just being skewed because I haven't dealt with anybody else.
Gary, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
The Utopia business model has been modified over the years, and rumor has it that it's more friendly to cities. First of all, are there other providers out there that might have, that you know of, that might have additional city-friendly models? And when I say city-friendly, I mean the city not incurring debt in order to get the infrastructure installed. And secondly, do you know what the take rate is for the 11 original Utopia cities and for the 5 that have subscribed since the change?
So, off the top of my head, I'm not aware of anybody else that right now is offering internet service, fiber service, without, I'm really not aware of anybody right now that's offering a citywide program without the city backing the bonds in some way, shape, or form. Doesn't mean that they aren't, but I'm not aware of any, and I think that would be a really important thing for us to research. On the second question, I want to say that the take rate that I have heard from our neighbors, for example, in Centerville and some of the other cities, exceeds 50% and higher of the original cities. Of the new cities, each one of them have exceeded the initial projection of 30%. I don't have the exact numbers, but again, we can get those from Utopia.
But each of those have exceeded that benchmark that then puts it into the black essentially from the start.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
I have a couple questions. Before we would get to a survey, you know, I'm curious about traditional providers and what they might be willing to offer, or if we can get any sense of their expansion plans or not, you know, because I think that would be an important thing to know in advance of you know, taking the pulse of the public about what their options are, just having a full view of what their options are from traditional providers and potential fiber providers. And then the other question I'd sort of like an answer to, because, you know, in your slide where you talked about kind of the three potential options, you know, one of the early concerns, you know, about Utopia was some of the debt and the having to roll bonds. And, you know, Utopia changed their business model to a certain extent, and some of that discussion seems to have, you know, gone away, that there are bonds that are being rolled and some of those financial concerns from those early adopter cities. But I'm curious whether that wall between the early adopter cities under the Utopia model and the newer cities under the UIA acronym model, whether as those cities that are having a much more positive experience, if they have any obligation to pay that debt, that bonded debt on the original adopter cities. There had been some discussion that might happen, and I think in picking a model, that would be really important to know is would Bountiful's residents and would Bountiful's potential backing of a bond truly only serve Bountiful's residents, or might we be on the hook for one of those early adopter cities? And so I'm still unclear and a little concerned just about answering that question before we go into a survey, because a survey might say, you know, have a question about, would you still prefer Utopia if this, you know, if this possible, or would you rather a model where the city built it out and then turned it over to a provider afterwards to run, knowing that we would control it and wouldn't incur anyone else's debts ever? So I'd like that answered before, so we'd know kind of what we are surveying.
Yeah, that's I think that's a good question. And I remember you asking the guy from Utopia when he came, and he assured us that it was, you know, separate and distinct, and that contracts would make that clear. But I think those are the kinds of questions that we need to be sure of, you know, even prior to a survey, because we don't want to go to the public and say, would you like the internet, and would you pay this much for it if you could get it, and then and then have our hands tied and not feel comfortable with the provider. So,
and that would be also maybe a question for our city attorney is it possible in drafting, you know, this would be a question to ask before a survey, but is it possible in drafting an agreement with Utopia that you could draft it so tightly that whatever we would be agreeing to and whatever our potential bonding authority would back could truly only apply to Bountiful, and there would never be any revenues that would roll over? Or is that not possible? Would we have to adopt kind of a boilerplate Utopia agreement?
I think it's possible, but the answer would be, it depends on what they're willing to agree to.
I think these are really critical things to consider, and even to contact every possible provider that we can to meet with them and find out what they can do.
yeah, I think that if we can become a little more educated about what the real options are for us, then we'll probably put out a better survey. But I'd love to move ahead in that direction.
I agree with that. I think we need to make quick progress towards the next step. I really do.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we're asking the right questions, and that everybody that could possibly be a quality provider to the city is invited to provide information to us so that we can make the best decision possible.
Agree.
What would be a reasonable timeline from the staff perspective to answer some of those questions about what those existing providers, what the potential providers on the list up here have for us, and then these questions on the kind of the crossover of funding on new Utopia and old Utopia, so that we could then use that to inform any potential survey?
6 to 8 weeks comes to mind, something like that, a couple months.
We're very gratified by that question, thank you. This move-in project has sort of tapped us, and Alan wouldn't say it, but, you know, our IT guys have been working basically every day of the week for the last few weeks. And so that time, Alan, you're comfortable with that time frame?
Sure. I'm the one that said it, so yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
You
I
need
think
your-
we can do
you
it.
need your
Well, I-
wires
I
back?
think-
'Cause
Yeah.
I think, Alan, I think as you go along, Alan, and a lot depends on what you can grapple with here and get accomplished here in this building. And if that needs to be changed, we'd understand that we'd have to give you some weeks longer.
Okay, thank you.
Council, I think we can, at the same time, move down parallel tracks. I think there's nothing that would prevent us from beginning to develop a survey. That then, once we have the information, we'll be ready right away to put a survey out to residents, which I think will help with the process. And one last question I have is when we come back, at that time, would you prefer that we bring some folks to answer questions for you, or would you like us to vet the questions and then just present sort of a summary for you? Because we could spend a lot of time, and I'm sure everybody would love to come and pitch their product to you personally, and we could spend a lot of time doing that, and we'd be happy to do that. We'd just like to know what your expectations are for the next meeting.
I think that would maybe prolong it unnecessarily. In my opinion, if Alan and if the staff, if you guys are willing to send out providers and say, what can you do for Bountiful? And then if you're willing to look at those results and just give us kind of an abbreviated version of what you think different companies are willing to do, what different providers can do, and what providers are best, to me, that would be more efficient than having them all come and present to us. But what do you guys think?
I really think that it would be best to have staff vet the different providers for us. Knowing the questions, we've got experts here that can vet them as for the questions that need to be brought to us. And at the same time, excuse me, we need to be, I think, working using that information on preparing a survey. So knowing what we get from them, how that survey would tie in with what we could actually offer. And so we won't be overselling or underselling this product.
So one of the questions I still have would be, what parts of Bountiful are covered by what levels of service from what providers now? And I understand that data is sometimes hard to get because the providers, might have proprietary business plans. They don't want their competitors to know they're, doing something or have targeted something in their capital plan. I'm not sure how we go about getting that information, but it is something I'm curious and interested in. Perhaps there is some way for the staff to gather that information and then aggregate it in some way that they would feel comfortable sharing it, but without having it reveal any proprietary top secret expansion plans, but would give us an overall view of the existing coverage, which would maybe speak to take rate or maybe speak to, what the private market is already planning to provide in some reasonable capital improvement plans that private providers might already have. So I don't necessarily have a great direction on how you might go about getting that, except for that it's still something that I'm interested in knowing and understanding.
We can research that. It might be a matter of contacting CenturyLink and Comcast and others and asking if they would give that information, but.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yeah, if I could, I'd like to ask our city attorney, and without any details, Mr. Drake, I'm sure that you can still provide me a solid legal decision or opinion. But if Utopia, and I don't mean this to be an advertisement for Utopia or a criticism of them, but if they are still incurring debt,
Microphone's still on?
huh?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. If they're still incurring debt and we sign with them, is there a way for us to protect ourselves contractually so that we're not on the hook for debt that, as Kate mentioned earlier, was incurred along the line getting to this point? What are your thoughts?
I think so, yeah, I do.
Okay.
Again, it all depends on, takes two to make an agreement. I had the microphone on, I just didn't have it facing my mouth. It takes two to make an agreement, but yes, I think we could do that. Just depends on what the parties are willing to agree to.
Okay. I don't want to put undue pressure, but it would be nice to get the information and the survey done as quickly as we can, given the workload that staff has.
As far as expediting that, I have a little bit of change of opinion as I've stood here and thought about it a little bit more. I don't know if you remember what Utopia presented. I have seen some of their documents, and their surveys are extremely detailed. I'm starting to think that as far as speed would be concerned, that would be a good option. I know there's a question about who's the one running the survey, but I think they're pretty scientific from what I've seen. They also include, I believe they also include what Kate was asking about, of what other providers are around. And so at the very least, we might consider that. And maybe I can send you a copy of what a survey would look like. I think they did one recently with South Jordan, or Woodland Hills is another place that they're working on right now, but it might be worth just looking at. It might be something much more comprehensive than our staff could provide.
I'm not opposed to looking at their survey and looking at what, making an evaluation of what questions make sense, but I am very uncomfortable, I think, from a kind of a transparency RFP procurement process. Using a vendor's specific survey would kind of fly in the face of that, transparency of kind of taxpayer dollars that I think we need to have, where we wouldn't be using a specific product from a vendor that might advantage them in a future RFP because they would have access to that data, or would have, not saying they would do this, but could scope questions in a way that would tend to skew things in their direction. So I really feel like from just a procurement potential process, we are better off and best served by managing our own survey so that it's seen as being fair and above board for anyone who may want to potentially bid.
I agree, but I also disagree. I mean, I think that the most important thing is that we have to vet correctly. And so if we vet correctly, and if Utopia still ends up being the best choice for Bountiful for whatever reason, then them doing a survey is the first step in the process. So, maybe we vet now, and then if it really is Utopia, if that really is the best choice for us, then we have them do a survey as the first step. It seemed to me like when he was here presenting, the representative from Utopia was saying that is the first step after we have decided to have them do the project. So in my opinion, right now, we're not ready to jump on board yet with them, and I think that's okay.
Right.
I feel comfortable with that, but I do think that over the next weeks, as we are vetting who would be a good choice for us, if they are clearly rising to the top, and if we feel comfortable with all of the questions that we have, if we feel comfortable with them as our provider, if we really do think they're the best answer, then I think that them moving ahead and doing the survey would alleviate staff time, would seem like an efficient way to get it done. It would, so I don't know, in my opinion, I think where we are right now is we need to make sure we, do our homework to know who the provider is that we want to use. And then maybe the survey is the first step after we have decided who that is.
I'd like to see those questions for sure that they have, just as a matter of course. I mean, if there's some questions out there that we can look at, there'll be a lot of them that would be common to all providers. Be nice to see them.
Yeah, if the questions are okay and it's a blind survey, that might satisfy everybody.
If we create our own, we'll still have no sense in inventing the whole wheel.
I would be more comfortable if we did our own survey, just for all of the reasons that Kate mentioned and that Richard was speaking of. I think it just gives us more integrity in our decision, and I just don't think it's good practice to have anyone who would have a financial gain saying. I think I would be more comfortable if we did our own survey.
I agree with Millie and Kate. I think we should do our own survey. We can look at their survey and see what they've surveyed and see what the questions are and incorporate that into ours. But I think it needs to be our survey.
Sure.
Just so we have our own
Yeah,
data.
yeah,
our
we
own-
should have our own survey, I think, there's no question.
And I'm not advocating for Utopia. I'm really not. I don't know if they're the best choice or not. I just remember them saying that that is the first step of their process. And so if eventually we do end up going with them, then I think that's the first step that they take. And so they will do it at some point if we choose them. And so I think right now the important thing is for us to do our homework and decide who we want to use going forward.
Agreed.
Alan, do you know what the build-out timeline is for a company once they're contracted in place?
I don't recall what that is.
Okay.
My guess was 5 years, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I recall that what Roger Timmerman told us was 3 to 5 years. So even if we made a decision today, it would still be best-case scenario, 3 years. So I don't know that a couple of months longer in a decision-making process over, multi-million-dollar infrastructure project is going to make a huge difference in ultimately the time frame for the project. That doesn't mean we don't want to be anxiously engaged.
Well,
Believe me, I
and
think,
Gary, that doesn't mean that when they say that timeline which Richard's referring to, there'll be people that get it sooner than the ones that get it last, right? So, I mean, that 3 to 5 years, those first folks may get it 2 or 3 years down the road, and it takes that long to get to the end of the line.
yes, and that's a great point, but I appreciate Richard's question because we have had some feedback from the public who seem to think that a decision, if we don't make a decision today, that it's, it seems like they expect they're going to get fiber tomorrow, and that's just not the case. And so but the council's loud and clear. We hear that this is something that's a major priority for you, and we'll get right on it, so.
Okay. If there aren't any other questions, we'll take a little bit of a timeout right here. Thanks a lot. We appreciate you coming, Alan.
Welcome,
We'll take
thank
a little
you.
time out, and then we'll start at 7 o'clock with our regular